The nightmare of a summer night. It was supposed to be the perfect summer getaway. A group of 5 friends, Ethan, Laura, Ben, Sophie, and Daniel, had rented a secluded lake house deep in the forests of Maine. The promise of warm nights, bonfires, and endless fun had drawn them away from the city. But none of them expected the horror that lurked in the darkness. The first few nights were peaceful. They swam in the lake by day and sat around the fire at night, telling stories and laughing. But on the 3rd night, something changed. It began with the whispers. As Sophie lay in bed, she heard faint voices outside her window. At first, she thought it was the wind rustling through the trees. But the murmurs grew louder, unmistakably human, speaking in a language she couldn't understand. She froze, her heart hammering. When she finally gathered the courage to look outside, there was nothing but darkness. The next morning, she told the others, but they brushed it off as her imagination. That night, however, the whispers returned, this time louder. And she wasn't the only one who heard them. Ethan, unable to sleep, wandered out onto the porch for some air. As he stood there, he noticed movement among the trees. A shadowy figure, tall and thin, stood just beyond the tree line, watching. Ethan called out, but the figure didn't move. He took a step forward, and in the blink of an eye, the figure was gone. The next day, tensions were high. Laura insisted they leave, but Ben and Daniel laughed it off, claiming it was just locals trying to scare them. That night, the true horror began. At midnight, the whispers became a deafening chorus, surrounding the house. The friends locked all the doors and huddled together in the living room, the air thick with dread. Then came the knocking. Slow, deliberate knocks on every window, every door. But when they peeked outside, no one was there. The power went out. The house was plunged into suffocating darkness. A piercing scream erupted from upstairs, Sophie. They rushed up to find her curled in the corner, trembling. "It touched me," she whispered. "Something cold." It whispered in my ear. The knocking grew more aggressive. Something was trying to get in. Shadows flickered against the windows, inhuman shapes shifting unnaturally. The friends grabbed whatever they could find, fireplace pokers, knives, anything to defend themselves. But deep down, they knew these weren't ordinary intruders. Then came the final sign, the writing on the walls. In the dim glow of their flashlights, they saw words scrawled in a dark, dripping substance, "Leave before dawn." Without hesitation, they ran. The car roared to life, and they sped down the dirt road, never daring to look back. As the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, the whispers faded. They never spoke of that night again. And when they returned weeks later with the police, the house was abandoned, no signs of forced entry, no writing on the walls. But deep in the forest, beyond where the car lights had reached, footprints led away from the house. And they weren't human. The nightmares, however, never left them. Sophie would wake up screaming, hearing the whispers in her dreams. Ethan swore he saw the figure watching him outside his apartment. Laura, the most skeptical of them all, started receiving strange phone calls, static on the line, and faint murmurs in the background. One by one, they began to disappear. Ben was the first. His car was found abandoned on a remote road, the doors flung open, the engine still running. There were no footprints, no signs of struggle, just his phone lying on the driver's seat, playing a distorted recording of whispers. Daniel vanished next. He had told Ethan days before that he felt like he was being followed. The police found his apartment door wide open, no signs of forced entry. But inside, the walls were covered in the same eerie message, "Leave before dawn." Panic set in. Ethan and Laura tried to make sense of it all, digging through every detail of that night at the lake house. Then, Sophie was gone too. She had checked into a motel, telling Ethan she couldn't sleep in her own house anymore. The motel staff found her room empty the next morning, her bed still made, the shower running. The only thing left behind was a mirror covered in handprints, some too large to be human. Now, only Ethan and Laura remained. They resolved to return to the lake house, to uncover the truth and end whatever had cursed them. Armed with cameras, weapons, and every ounce of courage they could muster, they drove back to that forsaken place. The house stood as they had left it, silent, waiting. As they stepped inside, the air grew heavy. The whispers began again, creeping from the walls. They pushed forward, searching every room, looking for any sign of what had happened. Then they found it. A trapdoor beneath the rug in the living room. It led to a basement they had never known existed. Descending into the darkness, they found an altar, old, covered in symbols neither recognized. Scattered around were remnants of ancient rituals, bones, and a single, rotting journal. The last entry sent chills down their spines. We called it forth. We welcomed it. Now, it will never let us go. A sudden gust of wind extinguished their flashlight. The whispers turned into screams. The last thing Ethan saw before everything went black was the figure, tall, thin, grinning. Days later, the police found the lake house empty once again. No trace of Ethan or Laura. Just their car, parked out front, engine still running. And scrawled across the walls, in dark, dripping letters. Leave before dawn. The abandoned summer camp. Camp Willowbrook had been closed for over 30 years, but its ghostly remains still sat deep within the woods, forgotten by time and swallowed by nature. Once a place of laughter and sunlit adventures, it was now a decaying ruin. The rumors surrounding its sudden closure were chilling, stories of missing children, of counselors who vanished in the night, and of something lurking in the surrounding forest. Despite the warnings from the locals, a group of 4 urban explorers, Lena, Mark, Sam, and Olivia, decided to investigate. Their YouTube channel thrived on exploring abandoned places, and this camp was a goldmine of eerie content. They arrived just before dusk, the towering pines casting long shadows over the rotting cabins. Looks like something straight out of a horror movie, Mark chuckled, adjusting his camera. Lena glanced at the old sign swinging in the wind, "Welcome to Camp Willowbrook," its cheerful font now cracked and faded. "Let's just get what we need and get out," she muttered. As they walked through the campgrounds, the air thickened. The cabins were eerily silent, their doors half open, as if waiting for new visitors. They found rusted bunk beds, tattered sleeping bags, and a scattering of old personal belongings, shoes, notebooks, even a teddy bear covered in dust. Sam entered the main hall and gasped. "Guys, look at this." On the walls, children's drawings were still pinned up. But they weren't the happy, colorful sketches of summer camp memories. These were twisted. Dark figures loomed over small children, their faces scratched out. Words were scrawled in thick, jagged letters. "Don't go into the woods. It sees you." A loud bang echoed from outside. Olivia screamed, spinning toward the sound. That came from the cabins. Mark sprinted outside, camera shaking in his grip. "Hello," he called. Silence. Then, slowly, the cabin doors began closing one by one, slamming shut with unnatural force. Lena grabbed Olivia's hand. "We need to go. Now." As they turned, the campfire pit flickered to life on its own, flames rising high. A figure stood just beyond the fire, a counselor's uniform draped over its impossibly tall frame. Its face was shadowed, but its eyes, those glowing, hollow eyes, stared straight through them. Then, in a voice that wasn't entirely human, it whispered, "Stay with us." The group ran, their screams swallowed by the trees. But as they reached the entrance, the wooden sign that once welcomed them now bore a new message, scratched deep into the wood. "You can never leave." They sprinted through the overgrown path leading back to their van. The engine sputtered as Mark twisted the key, hands trembling. The headlights illuminated the dense forest, but the road they had taken was no longer there. In its place, an endless stretch of towering trees loomed, trapping them within the campgrounds. "Where's the road?" Olivia shrieked, pounding on the dashboard. Sam turned back toward the camp, his face pale. "It's not just the camp that's haunted, it's the land." A cold wind rushed through the trees, carrying distant whispers. The whispers turned to laughter, children's laughter, hollow and distorted. Shadows moved between the trees, quick and unnatural. Lena gripped Mark's arm. "We need to find another way out." They left the van behind and ran deeper into the forest. The darkness was suffocating, the trees closing in like prison bars. The deeper they ran, the more the camp seemed to stretch and change around them. Then they saw it, a tall, wooden watchtower standing against the night sky. "We can see where we are from up there," Mark panted. They climbed the rotting stairs, the wood creaking beneath their weight. When they reached the top, their stomachs dropped. Instead of seeing the highway or town in the distance, they saw an endless sea of trees. And below them, at the base of the tower, figures began to gather. The camp counselors. Their faces were blank slates of darkness, their uniforms stained and tattered. And behind them, the children stood in rows, their faces frozen in eerie grins. Then, the tallest figure stepped forward. The same one they had seen by the fire. It lifted a hand and pointed at them. The tower shook. The wooden beams began to crack. A deafening scream filled the air, but it wasn't from them, it was coming from the camp itself, from the very land beneath them. Then everything went black. When Lena opened her eyes, she was lying in a bunk bed. The smell of damp wood and mildew filled her nose. Sunlight streamed through the cabin windows. She sat up, heart pounding. The others were there too, stirring awake. They were back in the camp. And outside, a new group of explorers was arriving. The cycle was beginning again. The vanishing during summer vacation. The summer was supposed to be perfect. For a group of 5 international college friends, Ethan, Maria, David, Sophie, and Luca, it was their last summer together before graduation. They had planned an idyllic 2-week getaway in a remote seaside village in southern Italy, a place untouched by mass tourism. The pictures had shown breathtaking cliffs, sun-drenched beaches, and a picturesque old town filled with charming cobblestone streets and ancient ruins. It was a dream destination, an escape from the pressures of reality. The villa they rented stood on a cliffside overlooking the endless blue of the Mediterranean. At sunset, the sky bled into the sea, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The villagers were friendly, though oddly reserved. They spoke in hushed tones, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes. The group chalked it up to the slow, sleepy lifestyle of the town. But then Maria disappeared. It happened on the 4th night. She had always loved the night, the quiet streets, the solitude of moonlit walks. When she didn't return by morning, they assumed she had wandered off and fallen asleep somewhere. But her bed was untouched, her phone still plugged into the charger. Her shoes were missing, but her bag, passport, and money remained in the room. Panic set in when they realized no one in town seemed surprised. The innkeeper, the old fisherman by the docks, the woman at the cafe, none of them reacted the way one would expect. Instead, they whispered among themselves in hushed Italian, casting wary glances at their remaining friends. David and Ethan went to the police station, a small, dimly lit building near the center of town. The officer on duty, an elderly man with sunken eyes, listened patiently but offered little help. "People leave," he said simply, as if it were a common occurrence. "She didn't leave," Ethan argued. "Her stuff is still at the villa. She wouldn't just disappear like that." The officer only nodded, scribbled something down, and told them to go back to their villa and wait. That night, David vanished. No signs of struggle. No farewell messages. The door to his room was still locked from the inside. His bed was unmade, as if he had just stepped out for a moment. Sophie broke down in tears, trembling as she clutched her phone. "We need to leave," she whispered. "Now!" They packed hastily and got into their rental car, speeding toward the only road out of the village. But after driving for nearly an hour, they found themselves back in front of the villa. Confused, Ethan turned the GPS on. The map showed only an endless loop of roads leading back to where they started. The highway that had brought them here was gone. Luca, the most logical of them all, refused to believe it. "We took a wrong turn. We'll try again." They tried again. And again. And again. Every time, they ended up back at the villa. By then, it was nightfall, and exhaustion forced them inside. No one slept. They sat in the dim living room, staring at the locked doors and windows. The town was silent, almost unnaturally so. No crickets. No waves crashing against the shore. Only an eerie, suffocating stillness. Then they heard it. A slow, deliberate knock on the door. They froze. Knock. 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 Ethan rose, hesitantly moving toward the peephole. Nothing. Just darkness. Knock. Knock. Screw this, he muttered, grabbing a heavy fireplace poker. He yanked the door open. Nothing. The porch was empty. Then, from behind him, Sophie let out a strangled scream. Luca was gone. The chair where he had been sitting was overturned, his phone lying on the ground, the screen cracked. No sound, no struggle. Just gone. Ethan grabbed Sophie's wrist and ran. Out of the villa, down the empty streets, past the silent houses. They didn't know where they were going, just away. But no matter how far they ran, the streets all twisted and turned, leading them back to the villa. Panting, Sophie clutched Ethan's arm. "It's the town," she sobbed. "It's doing this." A shadow moved in the distance. Not a person. Not an animal. Something tall and wrong, its limbs too long, its head tilting at an unnatural angle. It stood at the edge of the road, watching. They didn't dare move. Then, the whispers began. Low and unintelligible, echoing from the darkened alleyways and empty windows. The doors of the houses creaked open, but no one stepped out. The shadow moved closer. Ethan grabbed Sophie's hand and ran again. But his legs felt heavier, his mind clouded. The air around them thickened, as if they were running through water. A sudden scream rang through the air. Sophie's hand was wrenched from his grasp. He turned just in time to see her being pulled backward into the darkness, her eyes white with terror, her mouth open in a soundless scream. And then, nothing. Ethan stood alone in the middle of the street. His breath came in ragged gasps as the realization sunk in. They were all gone. He was alone. The whispers grew louder, surrounding him. The shadow loomed just inches away now. A voice, cold and ancient, whispered in his ear. "You were never meant to leave." And then, darkness swallowed him whole. The next morning, the sun rose over the quiet village. The sea sparkled, the breeze carried the scent of salt and wildflowers. Life continued as it always had. A new group of tourists arrived that afternoon, marveling at the beauty of the secluded paradise. And in the distance, from the windows of the empty villa, the shadows watched. Waiting.